Hello my loves, welcome to my April reading wrap up. I am Hannah, if you are new here, welcome. And April was a pretty good month. Although, I read 12 books in April, and I read 12 books in March, and prior to that I read 11 books in February, and 11 books in January, and this pattern I'm not appreciating. So I'm going to be fuming if I read 13 books in May. But anyway, let us crack on. As always, I would love to hear what you've been reading in the comments down below, and I have some questions for you, which we'll get to. But now, let me consult my list, because I can't be relied upon to actually remember the books, even when I've got piles of some of the books sat in front of me. So, and I'm also going to apologise for this. I may sound slightly like a broken record, because some of the books in here I have also read as a reading vlog. And so you may hear the phrase that I'm about to say. This is a book that I read in a reading vlog, which I will link down below if you want to hear my more in-depth thoughts. But in summary, the first book I read in April was The Snowman by Nesbø, or Nesbø, according to my authentically Norwegian friend. And this was fun. It was fine. I read it as part of the Storygraph do a Read the World challenge every year, where there's 10 different random countries on it and you read a book from every country. And this was what I picked for Norway, because I figured, what is more Norwegian than Scandi crime? So I didn't really know anything about it, other than the fact that I know that this is a very well liked and well respected author, and I knew that there had been a film adaptation. This is a film cover, and I hate that, with Michael Fassbender in, that I think had been like an absolute flop. But yeah, this is one of the books with Nesbø's character Harry Hole, who is a kind of police detective. And because this isn't a genre that I read a lot of, I'm not sure how much of my enjoyment, because I did think this was like a romp. It was a good page-turny, fun read. And I don't know how much of that was novelty value, because it's just not the sort of book that I normally read, or how much of it was because this is a very good example of the genre. And to be honest, I'm not really one to speak to that. I don't know if this is a brilliant Scandi crime novel. I just don't know. But I thought it was fun. I thought it was pacey. It had that, for me, it pretty much hit that sweet spot that you want with a crime novel of, I guessed some stuff, I didn't guess some stuff, so I didn't feel like I knew exactly what was going to happen, but I also wasn't completely confused. So yeah, I thought it was good. I did think that the climax, the final scenes and ending, got a little bit silly. But it was fun. If you're looking for just a pure piece of escapism, crime fiction, this is a safe pair of hands. I enjoyed it. It was good. Next up, I have a book that I've actually been reading on and off for, I think, most of this year, and it is Queer, a collection of LGBT writings from Ancient Times to Yesterday, edited by Frank Wynne, and this is published by Head of Zeus. And as it says on the tin, this is an anthology of lots of queer writing. And I had a really lovely time with it. It's beautiful. Look at those end papers. Yeah, I think it's a really great collection. It had writers in here who I have read before and loved, writers who I had heard of but hadn't read before, and in some cases writers who I'd read but didn't know that they were queer writers, so that was fun. And then some writers that I'd never heard of. it has a good stab of being intersectional, but on the whole it does skew Western. And yeah, I had a lovely time with it. It's really hard to review a collection because, you know, obviously, as you'd expect with, I mean, how many are in here? I think like 70 plus, maybe even more than that, authors and writers. So, you know, I'm not gonna like everything, and nor should I like everything. So that's why I just kind of like, I'm gonna come back to this, I think. What I will say, one is a kind of critique of the format and the layout. So for every extract, you get this little bio at the top here, which was great. And sometimes, you know, you sometimes read a little bio and you're like, that I need to watch that film just of that person's life. There were so many moments like that reading this book. And it gives you the author's dates here, but it doesn't tell you the date that the piece itself was written. So obviously if someone has been alive and writing for like 4 decades, I personally, for my own ability to kind of contextualize, would have quite liked the date to be in here. It also didn't tell you explicitly at the outset if you were reading a short story or a complete essay, or if you were reading sort of an excerpt from a larger piece of writing. And again, I just would have found that useful context. You can figure it out by looking in the acknowledgements at the back based on like where each of these pieces were originally published, but I just think it would have been nice as at the start of each extract to have that. And I am forever in search of more explicit bisexual representation in anthologies and books like this, but recommend, really liked it. And I'm definitely like, there are some authors that I read extracts of in here who I haven't read before, but who are sitting on my shelves unread. So that was really a really nice little like reminder to pick those up soon, Hannah. I feel like I'm talking really fast today. I'm so sorry. Let me have a sip of coffee. How are you? I hope you've had a good day. Next up, we have another book that I read as part of a reading vlog, which I will link down below if you want more of my thoughts. And this was Spring by Ali Smith. So if you have been here for a little while on my channel, you may know that I have been vlogging my reading experience of the whole of Ali Smith's seasonal quartet. It's a series of 4 books, well 5 if you include a companion piece at the end, that Ali Smith wrote really directly responding to what was going on in the world. Obviously writers are always responding to what is going on in the world, but she kind of sat down and went, I'm going to start by looking at what's going on and just write a kind of like novels that respond to that. And it started with autumn and winter, so I have vlogged those 2 previously, and this month I did Spring by Ali Smith. And you will also know, if you have been here for any amount of time, that I'm a very big fan of Ali Smith. So the bar for my enjoyment of an Ali Smith book is like way high. And this was the book of hers that I have read that I enjoyed the least. That is not to say that I don't think it's an excellent book and I wouldn't wholeheartedly recommend it to you. It's just that, as I said, the bar for me with Ali Smith is like through the roof. As always, Ali Smith proves to be, for me, completely unsum-upable in terms of like describing the mechanics of exactly what goes on. And it's not even like her plots are complex in that lots of stuff happens. It's just, I get this vibe when I'm reading an Ali Smith book that like, there's the plot and then there's what the book is about. And they are 2 separate things. But I did think reading this book that you could almost feel the years, because by the time that she got round to writing Spring, she must have been doing this sort of like writing experiment for quite a long time, and I think you could feel her rage and her frustration at what was going on in the world. And that is not a bad thing. I am not bashing any book for getting mad at the state of the world. I think, you know, rightly so. However, for me, what I normally love about Ali Smith's books is this way that she can so subtly and intricately explore the politics of everyday lives, and she explores these big things in society, these big issues, these big topics, through her characters and her story. Whereas in this book, the political felt slightly more overt, and therefore I felt just a little less connected to the characters, because I felt like they were being used to tell me something more than I've previously felt. But I still think she's magical and marvellous and wonderful. But yeah, more thoughts in the vlog, linked down below. The next book I read was an audiobook. And if you are familiar with the app Scribd, that's what I use to listen to most of my audiobooks. And I have that toxic trait because on Scribd you don't like pay per title. It's like a monthly amount, and you just pay what you pay, and you can listen to or read the ebooks of like as much as you want. So I save so many titles on my Scribd. Like if I have even like vaguely heard of a book, I'm like, sure, saved on Scribd. So every so often I end up listening to a book kind of randomly, because I will force myself to go really far down in the depths of my saved list and just like read something that has been sat there for ages. So the book I read was The Naked and the Dead by Norman Mailer. And I really didn't know much about Norman Mailer. I have found things out about Norman Mailer since reading this book, which is sort of why I felt the need to give you that little preamble. But we'll talk about the book first, and then we'll talk about him. But yeah, I had heard of Norman Mailer. I knew he was an American writer. I'd seen him on that one episode of Gilmore Girls where he had a cameo. Like, I think that was the extent of my cultural understanding of Norman Mailer and who he is. But I was intrigued by the premise of this book. So The Naked and the Dead is a piece of World War II historical fiction. But I was intrigued for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because Norman Mailer fought in the Second World War, and he wrote this book when he was like 25, and I think it was published in like 1948. So like quite close to the end of the war, and I don't think I have read that many books. I know they exist, but I don't think I have read that many books that have been written about World War II or any of the big kind of historical moments, but without a really big chunk of distance. So I was intrigued to read something that had been written maybe with some personal insight, but also something that had been written so recently. And also because I knew it was set sort of on the Asian frontier of the war. Most of the World War II books and films actually that I've read have dealt more with what was going on in Germany than what was going on with Japan. And so I was interested for all of those reasons. Now, as I said, he was quite young when he wrote this, and it is by no means a perfect novel, and you can tell that he is not very experienced as a writer. It follows this platoon of men on a kind of made-up fictional island somewhere in the South Pacific called Anna Pompeii. And it kind of just follows all of the men. So you see them in a group, and you've got this overarching narrative of literally like the movements that's going on. And I do think he is very attentive about character, and he draws characters really, really well. And I think his description of the setting was really brilliant. At points, like really, really affecting. Like you could really kind of feel like you could experience like all the extreme weather and stuff that you get kind of in the South Pacific. And that was great. But the structure felt quite clunky to me. So you'd kind of pop into the head of one of the characters in the present, and then you'd go back in time and experience a chunk of their life prior. And it just felt quite like, oh, are you wondering why this character is acting like this? You're finding him unlikable? Let me show you what he has been doing in his previous, like, his earlier life and stuff. So it felt a little unsubtle. But on the whole, I wouldn't be rushing to read a Norman Mailer book again, but there were some interesting things in there. I Googled him after I finished reading it because there'd been something in the book that had been bothering me a little bit, and that was the amount of anti-Semitism that was in there. Because I know that just because America was fighting in a war allegedly on the against the Nazis and should therefore kind of be on the side of Jewish people, I know better than to assume that every individual soldier would be free from prejudice, but there was quite a lot of anti-Semitism in the book. And so I was interested because I thought Norman Mailer maybe was Jewish, and it turns out he was. So I was just kind of, you're like, how I feel about this may well depend on, the author and their lived experience, because parts of it felt a little gratuitous, but I think if it's coming from a Jewish writer, which it was, okay, still not pleasant to read, but okay. But as I was Googling him, I then found out that he's kind of had a history of violent relationships with women to the point where he stabbed his ex-wife. She'd survived. But yeah, I think if I had known that prior to picking up the book, maybe I wouldn't have picked it up. So I wanted to mention it now in case that would sway whether or not you wanted to pick it up. But yeah, I only found that out after I had read the book, not doing my due diligence. So yeah, that was a bit of a I just felt a bit afterwards. But I know there is a whole spectrum of opinions on how much we can divorce an author's opinions from their works, and frankly, right now, I do not have the energy to weigh into that debate. So moving swiftly on to 3 more books that I read in a vlog. So again, I will link the vlog down below where you can hear me talk a little bit more about each of these titles. So the theme for this vlog was I had taken to Instagram to ask you all what the most fucked up book you'd ever read was. I was just curious. I was in a scampy mood. I was interested. And some of the books that you recommended were books that were already on my shelf. So I thought, hey, maybe it will be fun to read some of these books in a vlog and chat to you about them. So I will link that in the box down below. And the first book I read, I really, really liked. So this was Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. Now this book I bought ages ago. I mean, well, not that long ago, because I think it only came out in 2020. But Eliza is an author from up here in the Northeast. And again, if you've been around here for a little while, you will know that I am trying to read more local to me authors this year. So I knew this was one that I wanted to get to, and I was really pleased actually when a number of people suggested this book, and I was like, of course, it is on my shelf. This is a book that follows a main character called Irene, who is living in Newcastle. She's from Newcastle. She has been to art school and is now back in the Northeast trying to sort of make her way as an artist. She's a photographer. Specifically, she's a photographer who is interested in sort of fetish photography with quite a strong BDSM slant. And all of the models, or most of the models that she uses, are men. So this is a book that is very much looking at gendered power dynamics. And Irene is a fascinating sort of anti-hero character, because we are inside her head, and yet she is quite at a distance from us. And she's this incredibly beautiful woman. Everyone talks about how beautiful she is, like how much of a physical impression she makes, you know, tall, red hair, gorgeous. And her behavior becomes increasingly violent and increasingly threatening, and yet the men that she is in these situations with just seem unable to see her as a physical threat to them, no matter what she does to them. And I thought that was just so interesting. She is not likable. The way she treats some of her friends, as well as some of these men that she encounters, is fascinating, but horrible. And yet you're kind of still rooting for her, even though she is objectively like not a nice person. And yeah, I just thought that Eliza Clark, this is a debut, and I thought she did a brilliant job of exploring a lot about class and art, as well as about gender and power and threat. And yeah, it was just ace. I thought it was great. Then the second book, after a swig of coffee, I think. The second book I read in that vlog was Things We Lost in the Fire by Mariana Enriquez. So she is an author that I have been meaning to check out for quite a while. She's an Argentinian author who I've heard people talk about her books as being sort of political, but also with some kind of body horror and quite grotesque. And when my friend lent me this, I thought, perfect, I will include it in the vlog. This book made me ask what has become my own personal question that always prompts a slightly existential crisis. Do I even like short stories? So this is a short story collection, and I just don't know if short stories are a format that I get on with. I said it in the vlog, and I will say it here now, and I'm fully aware of how stupid it makes me sound. I think for me, short stories are too short. I like a little bit of time. I like to dwell in the setup, and I like to really kind of get into something and explore it. And I think, because on the whole, I think I tend to prefer books that are in the 300 to 500 page mark anyway, so I don't even massively get on with like super short novels. So I didn't love this, but I can't really tell if it was my fault or not. I mean, obviously not my fault. My taste is not my fault, but you know what I mean. Yeah, these stories in particular sort of seemed to take quite a while to get going, which obviously if the story is only like 15 pages and you spend 7 pages kind of establishing it doesn't leave much room for other things to develop. And I finished this a couple of weeks ago now, and I can only recall, and I mean, I am Hannah Lost the Plot for a reason, so my ability to remember the plot is questionable at the best of times, but I can only remember a couple of the stories from this, and even then, not in much detail. So there were interesting themes explored in them. All of the stories are set in and around Buenos Aires, and deal kind of with class and inequality and politics and wealth, and it's all interesting stuff. I think I like to get my teeth sunk into something a little bit more, and I think this was a me problem. But yeah, so I don't know if I recommend it. If you really like short stories and you liked the sound of that, then you probably would get on with this quite well. The final book that I read in that vlog, I really didn't get on with. I was not buying what this book was selling, and it was The Doloriad by Missouri Williams. This is another book that is really difficult to define, and almost it doesn't feel like what the blurb says it is, or even what the bones of the story are. So this follows a character called Dolores and her family. It is a sort of post-apocalyptic dystopian book, and the family are all the sort of progeny of a brother and sister who basically were like, well, we're the only ones left. They don't think there are any other people around, and so they decide, I guess it's down to us to repopulate. So all of the characters in this, other than the matriarch, who is called the matriarch, and the uncle, who is called the uncle, all of them are the products of incest. And I think this was an exploration about humanity's drive to survive and questioning whether or not that is always wise. But I didn't get on with the writing style of this book. It's very, very slow, and it's very cerebral, which again is not necessarily something that I'm not drawn to. For me, it felt like it never really got going. And then there are characters in this with, particularly Dolores, but other characters as well, who have limb differences, and some characters, especially Dolores, who have quite significant developmental delays, and the way they are treated and what happens to them, I just didn't enjoy reading about. It's a tough book, but I thought it was going to be tough, but it wasn't quite tough in the way that I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to hit me kind of emotionally and viscerally, and it is more kind of intellectual than that, and I felt really, really at a distance, and not for me, this one, sadly. So that was that vlog, and then to cheer myself up, I haven't counted this as a full book because it's such a tiny little thing, but this is a comic called Two Stories by Lizzie Stewart from 2019, and it's got two lovely little comics in it. I bought it because I have been coveting Lizzie Stewart's graphic novel. Oh God, Alison, I think it's called. I see it in my local bookshop all the time, and I always pick it up and go, oh, but I'm not a big graphic novel reader, and graphic novels are expensive, eh? So I thought, well, I'll go on Lizzie's website and I'll buy this little comic to see if I like it, because I knew I liked her writing style. I knew I liked her art style. She's got this lovely, these lovely simple lines, and I always think her color palettes are always just like not what you always see. I say you always see, having just said I don't read a lot of graphic novels. God. You may well see this colour palette quite a lot. I personally have not. And I love like that. So it's a mixture of this very kind of quite traditional plate style, and then these lovely kind of one-off pieces. But they were just lovely. And now I think it's my birthday next month, and maybe I just treat myself to a copy of Alison by Lizzie Stewart, because I had come across Lizzie Stewart because she draws rather the book covers of the books she reads, which I thought was so lovely, and was an idea that I stole and said I was going to do this year. It was one of my New Year's resolutions to draw the book covers of every book I read, and I have failed at it. So I really feel like I just owe Lizzie. I owe Lizzie me buying her book. But this was lovely, and if you just want like a nice little pick me up, I really recommend it. And then I had another graphic novel actually to tell you about. This one I read on my e-reader because it's actually available for free online. It is Cosmo Knights by Hannah Templer, and I read this for it was the April pick for the book club that I'm part of, which is Queer Books Newcastle. Monthly shout out to Queer Books Newcastle. I will link their social media down below. It's a lovely little book club in Newcastle. You're very welcome. And this, I just had a lovely time with this. Again, I don't read a lot of graphic novels and comics, so I feel like I don't have a huge amount to say about them. But it follows basically, it's set in space, and we love space gays. So it's set in space, and in this galaxy there is this tournament, like a kind of Cosmo Knight is a role in a tournament where basically these Cosmo Knights in these big kind of like Transformers style suits fight for the hand of a princess of that planet. And so it's very patriarchal, and it's got really like bound up in money and consumerism, and like different people like put stakes in different Cosmo Knights, and you have different people backing different knights, and then the knights are trying to win the princess for like on behalf of another royal family or a planet or a consortium, which I thought was a kind of interesting sort of Hunger Gamesy style take. And so that's the kind of setting, and then the characters that we meet in it in one way or another are trying to frustrate and disrupt that system. And it was a lovely time. I thought the colour palette was absolutely stunning. I will insert a couple of screenshots here, but it looked beautiful. I actually wish I had a hard copy of it, and I might buy volume 2. Volume 2 I think is also available online for free, but I might buy it just because it's so pretty to look at. And yeah, it was cute and lovely, and you know, I read it in an hour and it was charming, and now we can all have a nice thirsty moment together for Cass. I am sorry if I have moved. So that was Cosmo Knights by Hannah Templer, and then the next books are both audiobooks. So having read and enjoyed The Snowman earlier in the month, I was in the mood for another crime book, and I know, can I have a single video on my channel where I don't talk about Jen Campbell? Maybe, maybe not. Jen's favourite crime author she talks about a lot is Nikki French. So Nikki French are a husband and wife writing team who write a lot of crime fiction, and I've never read any of them, and Jen really rates them, and I thought, well, I'll give that a go. And I really liked it. I thought it was great. So I read Blue Monday, which is the first in a series following a psychiatrist called Frida Klein. And the first book is Blue Monday, and then I think the second book has something to do with Tuesday, and then Wednesday we go through the days of the week. And I thought this was great. It was really, really interesting to have a crime book told from the perspective of someone who's investigating it, but not the police, and not like a PI. So Frida has a very specific role that she's playing, and I thought as a character she was brilliant. I thought the pacing was great. The audio performance was brilliant, and I can't remember the name of the actor who read it, and I will insert their name here. I just thought it was great, and I will definitely be continuing with the series. Really characterful, as well as a genuinely good crime story, and again had that balance of guessing some stuff and not guessing some stuff. It also includes a trope, which I normally hate, and I won't say what the trope is because it is a spoiler, but I thought that trope was handled so well, and I completely believed it, and I never, ever, ever believe it. So, well done to Nikki French. Next audiobook was non-fiction. Was this my only non-fiction this month? I think this was the only non-fiction book I read this month. I normally try to read a little more, but whatever. It was a very good non-fiction book. It was Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism by Amanda Montell. And again, this is one that I've seen doing the rounds on Instagram, and it keeps popping up on Storygraph for me as well. And I saw that it was available on Scribd and thought, hey, yeah. It was read, before I forget, I did write this one down, read by Anne-Marie Gideon. And this is looking at, as you probably guessed from the title, the language of cults. And it was fascinating. So interesting. I think sometimes books like this can feel either really, really academic and a bit impenetrable, or they can go too far the other way and they feel a bit like pseudoscience-y. This, for me, not being an expert in the field, I might add, felt like it hit that sweet spot, and it was really interesting, and it sort of covers this whole range of sort of actual cults, like Heaven's Gate or Jonestown, and then moves through sort of things like Scientology, and moves into the sort of more everyday cultish language that we use. So looking at, for example, kind of wellness regimes, various influencers who have kind of cult-like followings, and also like cult beauty and cult fitness, and all these ways that actually now to be cultish is kind of to be desired. There's like an exclusivity to it, and she tracks the history of that like so brilliantly. And it was, yeah, I find non-fiction quite hard to kind of review, but I thought it was great. I do wish I had a hard copy of it. Not anything to do with Anne-Marie Gideon's performance, because I think she was great, but I would have liked to do some underlining and some annotating and some like marking of pages, because Hannah lost the plot. So I would have liked to do that, but other than that, yeah, I thought it was brilliant, and really, really recommend it if that is something that you are at all interested in. Penultimate book I read this month was a Greek myth retelling. This is Elektra by Jennifer Saint. And I had read it. I borrowed this from my friend Lula because we were looking at going to a Jennifer Saint event, because she was up here promoting her book that's just come out, Atalanta, which is there. And I was like, oh, I haven't even read Elektra yet. So Lula lent me this, and here's the thing. I think I have been well and truly spoilt by the existence of Natalie Haynes. I know like Greek myths tend to be, you either like Greek myth retellings or you don't. And I do generally, like, I loved Greek myths as a kid. If I picture in my head the books I remember reading again and again and again when I was a kid, it was a book of Greek mythology, and I loved it. I do think that I have read the story that gets told the most, or at least the one that I have read the most, is the Iliad, so the Siege of Troy and Achilles, all that. And this is that as well. And it's really hard because I get annoyed when people do too much direct comparison, particularly in this area, because it does tend to be more female authors who write them, and sometimes I feel like the comparisons are like a bit like, just you don't need to like pit all these women against each other. They can all just exist in this space, and that's lovely and fine. But I do think Natalie Haynes' 1,000 Ships is the best retelling of the Iliad ever. So after that, all of them leave me a little bit cold. So this is told from the perspective of Elektra, who is the daughter of Agamemnon, who, if you are familiar with the Iliad or not, he's the sort of the head of the Greeks, so the head of the people who are sieging Troy. His brother Menelaus is the one who was married to Helen, who has been stolen, and that whole bit has like instigated it. So Elektra is the daughter who is left at home. It's told from her perspective, it's told from her mother Clytemnestra's perspective, and it's told from Cassandra's perspective, Cassandra being a Trojan priestess and the daughter of the king of Troy. So we've got these kind of three narrative perspectives, which I thought was interesting, but I was curious as to why then, given that the book actually kind of does have equal weighting to all three perspectives, as to why Jennifer Saint called this book Elektra, when it's actually all three of them. And it is interesting I'm always here for re-exploring female perspectives of events from which their voices have been largely excluded. And there were some interesting things in here, particularly the relationship between Clytemnestra and Elektra, which is not a good one, because Elektra is a daddy's girl. She thinks her dad is amazing, despite the fact, and this is not a spoiler because it happens quite early on, Agamemnon, so Elektra's dad, literally sacrifices her older sister Iphigenia in order to get a good wind so that he can go to Troy. Kills her sister. So Clytemnestra, the wife, is fucking furious, quite rightly. And Elektra's like, well, what's he going to do? Prioritize his daughter's life over the lives of all his men? I think maybe part of the problem was that I couldn't quite get on with Elektra in this book. But the main issue I think I had with it was that it felt quite on the surface. And a lot of what was happening in the book was like, yes, this is what happens in the story. And so it didn't, for me, feel like much new was being added. And like I said, even with the like telling it from the different female perspectives, that's also what Natalie Haynes does in 1,000 Ships. It's also what Pat Barker has done, although I really didn't like The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. But yeah, this was fine. It was not my favourite. There was nothing wrong with it. It felt quite formulaic, and it lacked a bit of oomph and guts. And oomph and guts is what I normally like about a Greek myth. And then the final book I read in April. Oh my fucking God, I am so happy to tell you. I finished reading Les Miserables. I've been reading this since the first day of January. I was originally going to do one of those slow read-alongs that crop up on Instagram and other places, where you read a chapter a day. I've not read Les Mis before. I will not be reading Les Mis again. I didn't like this book. I am astonished at myself that I made it through all 1,262 pages What I liked about this book was the story. And I already knew the story. I'm so aware that it makes me sound like such a heathen, but this is a whole lot of waffle. I think because, was this serialized? I would be so surprised if this book wasn't published in serials, because this felt like Victor Hugo was just eking out his paychecks. Do you know what I mean? Like, we would go, like, again, I don't mind a slow story, and I have read big, chunky, long books. I have read War and Peace. I'm in the middle of reading War and Peace for a second time. I don't mind a big book. I really don't. But so much of this was utterly superfluous to the plot, in my opinion. It was like whole 100-page digressions about the history of a monastery that I'm just like, please no, stop. So I'm going to stick with the musical, and I'm sorry if that makes me the most basic of readers, but this didn't do it for me. So there we are. They are all the books that I read in April. Mixed bag. Some I really, really liked. Particular highlights. Well, probably no, Boy Parts. Boy Parts would probably be my highlight of the month, and some lows. But yeah, I would love to know in the comments down below what you have been reading in April. How's it going? Are you happy with what you've been reading? Have you been on a bit of a... Man just shouted outside my house. For a moment I thought he was telling me what he'd been reading, but he wasn't. But yeah, I'd love to know what you have been reading. If you have recommendations for... What did I want recommendations for from you? Oh, really good buy rep. Like explicit buy rep in a book. And don't say Heartstopper, because I love Heartstopper, but we all know Heartstopper. And then I will be doing... I enjoyed my little fucked up book vlog experience, and I'm looking to do more of them. So I would also like your recommendations for the most fucked up book. Maybe not recommendations, maybe just tell me the most fucked up book you've ever read. And why not tell me what your favourite graphic novel is, and also if you've read any good non-fiction that sounds a little bit like Cultish by Amanda Montell, because that is the sort of non-fiction I like. Like, yeah. So, thank you very much for hanging out with me, and I look forward to seeing you soon. If you have enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and if you're new here and you want to hear more about my rambling thoughts about books, please do subscribe to my channel. And I've linked also in the box down below my Instagram. I do really, really short little wrap-ups on my stories of every book that I have read that month. And yeah, see you.